in the US right now, we're very, very concerned with children and teens and their nutrition. Now, we're also concerned with adults. But as you can imagine, there's this kind of pessimistic approach to nutrition where we say, you know, adults are fully formed. The chances that I can get a 40 or 50-year-old person to actually change their eating habits and change their lifestyle is really, really difficult because it's so ingrained. So there are a lot of folks at the Centers for Disease Control, WHO, FDA, all of these organizations who are saying we need to talk to children about nutrition, set them off on this good path for lifelong health. And so this really starts with the home. It starts with schools, it starts with media, all these different places where we have an opportunity to talk about nutrition. So when we talk about nutrition for children, there are a couple things to really keep in mind. You know, their rate of growth is really significant. You know, if you think about a 1-year-old up to an 18-year-old, that growth is just amazing. So their nutrient needs are going to change a lot depending on where they are in their growth cycle. Also their gender, right? We see differences in the amount of food that people need, preferences, timing, all of this around gender. Different kinds of activities. Okay, so activities like if they're physically active, if they're trying to do specific things with their body in terms of sport. And then I have this category of etc. And here this could be disease states, disease conditions, things like this that we have concerns about as well. And then needs vary from individual to individual. So you could have 2 girls, same height, same weight, same age. Their nutritional needs could be a little bit different depending on where they are in their growth cycle, even though chronologically they're the same age. They may not have the same skeletal age, they may not be at the same age in terms of menarche, all of these other things. Now I want to just kind of focus our attention here because this is the down and dirty of it. 81% of children consume a diet that's measured as needing improvement or poor. Oy. There's a lot of room for improvement here. If only it's 1 out of 5, 20% of our kids are getting a healthy diet, right? We need to actually change this. So, you know, we have to kind of look at where we are right now. And when we look at diets that young children are eating, we see that they're high in sugar. Again, these things aren't going to be a surprise to you because this is what adults are facing too, right? Adults have diets that are high in sugar, high in saturated fat. Just way too many calories every day, all right? And that's half of the equation. The other half of it is that we don't move enough, okay? Children also, just like adults, so children don't have a monopoly on this, can kind of override that feeling of fullness or satiety. And parents push them to do this, okay? And I don't want to blame everything on parents. You know, parents aren't evil. But there are things we do whether or not we know it. Things I do, things my neighbor does, you know, my friends do. We all do these things and we need to stop. We need to just take a moment and really look at what we're doing. And if you think about some of these factors that derail normal satiety, like I said, they're all around us. And it can be as simple as really highly palatable, yummy, yummy foods are constantly available. I went to get my car repaired the other day and they had a candy bar display and they were selling candy bars. And I thought, wow, that would be really good. But why would I get a candy bar where I'm getting my car repaired, right? So there's food all around us. We're constantly confronted with this push to eat, eat, eat. And it's not like the car dealership was selling broccoli, right? So, you know, we have to really look at our food environment and then what we're doing as parents. Before we get to that blame game, let's look at some of the specific nutrient needs that kids have, all right? So carbohydrates and fiber. A low-carb diet is never appropriate for any human, and especially not kids, okay? Because their brain runs on carbohydrates just like yours. I mean, I want my kids to be able to think when they go to school, otherwise I'm wasting their time and mine, right, as well as their teachers. So we really, really want to make sure that kids are getting enough carbohydrates. Now that doesn't mean ho-hos and ding-dongs and white bread, okay? That means we want them to be getting whole grains, okay? Fruits, vegetables. Really staying away from a lot of refined sugars and refined carbohydrates. Now fiber is a big part of this and we're going to want to kind of adjust our fiber needs a little bit here. And I really love this rule right here. So it's age plus 5 grams. I found through the years that although there are a lot of complicated formulas for figuring out fiber needs for a child, most parents, they can't remember it. But most parents, even those of us who might be asleep at the wheel, know how old our child is. And we can figure out this pretty simple equation of adding 5 to that number. Okay? Now, Sizer and Whitney in your book use another formula. I really want you to use this one if you can. It's going to work out to just about the same amount. Also, when children are picky eaters, we want to be a little bit cautious, especially if they're not eating enough protein or something else on their plate that's important. If you have a lot of fiber in that young child's diet, they're going to fill up on the fiber and not be hungry at the next meal. So that's why we may need to adjust that a little bit. But the sad news here is that we know adults are getting about 10 to 12 grams of fiber a day, and they need 25 and 38, women and men respectively. Children are not faring much better, right? It's all those highly refined foods. So let's get away from that. Let's feed them real food. We also want to look at the fat that we're feeding kids. Now, I mentioned earlier that the typical diet for children is really high in sugars, okay, those simple carbs, and then it's also very high in saturated fat. We want to focus on those fatty acids we really, really want people to have, the omega-3s and the omega-6s. Get away from saturated and no trans fats. It's just as dangerous for a young kid as it is for a 50-year-old. It doesn't matter, okay? However, a no-fat or even a low-fat diet is not advised. So when a child is moving to milk at about the age of 1 or 2, depending, we want that child to be on whole milk. Okay, and you're like, well, Lisa, you just said to watch saturated fat. I'm not as concerned with saturated fat that comes from milk, because if you think about milk, the child is getting vitamin D, they're getting calcium, and they're getting a lot of protein, and it's fairly low cost, it's widely available. That's very different than going out and having a whole bucket of fried food, okay, that contains a lot of saturated fat, or having, you know, lots and lots of cheese, or these other kinds of things that don't have a lot of nutritive value. So you want to pick and choose your sources of saturated fat very, very carefully. Now let's look at protein. This is our third of the macronutrients, and of course someone who is growing needs to have protein. We know that, right? Children need a little bit more, but consider that the typical American diet contains plenty of protein for a growing child. Okay? We might be concerned, however, with some of the micronutrients that are found in proteins. So again, iron for young girls, and zinc as well. And then we want to be really aware of vegetarian diets and the non-heme, heme iron issue, especially teenage girls there. Okay? So that's our protein story. Now, if you think about some of the things that influence young children's food choices, I want you to kind of close your eyes and guess what the most important thing is. I'll pause here. Okay, you've probably gotten an answer. And now I put these up here for you. I didn't put them in order, okay? So it's not children's preferences that is the #1 driver of the foods they choose. So if you look at this list, the #1 thing, role modeling. Now, who is the role model in the home? Who is the first teacher? It's mom and dad, or mom or dad or grandma, whoever that child is living with, okay? The responsible adult, the guardian. So, you know, this is really an opportunity to talk to parents. If you don't want your child eating fried food and cheap carbohydrates and all of that stuff, you can't eat it. You have to eat broccoli, you have to eat apples, you have to eat lean meats, dairy products, all of those things. Okay, we see a real disconnect there. And I can remember this from my childhood where my dad would say, do as I say, not as I do. Well, my dad never ate zucchini or eggplant. I never even had those till I moved away from home when I was in my 20s, okay? We had iceberg lettuce and corn. Those were vegetables. All right, so it's an opportunity. If you want your child to eat healthy, you eat healthy. You be the responsible adult. And I think that this is a very provocative thing when you talk to parents, right? I mean, to actually, you know, suggest to them that they have to eat, you know, change their eating habits in order for their children to eat better and be healthier. That's controversial. That's a provocative statement. Okay, so we have role modeling. We've beaten that to death. All right, then we have these other kinds of things. So presentation of foods. And food marketers know this. I mean, it's no wonder that children's food is full of food dyes and coloring, and it's in fun shapes and all those other things. You can use that to your advantage too. I mean, carrots, red pepper, you know, brightly colored foods really attract attention. You know, it's okay to cut those carrots in funny little coin shapes and, you know, have the child spend them and all these fun things. That's fine. You want to harness that. Availability. Now, I have teenagers, and luckily they never watch these things, so I can talk about them. I could have a whole cantaloupe sitting there. Would they ever cut that cantaloupe? Never. It would never occur to them. Yet if I have the cantaloupe cut up and in the fridge, they open the door and it's right there, they're going to eat it. Okay? So what's available in the home? And again, if I don't want my kid eating potato chips and Twinkies and Ding Dongs and soda, I don't have it in the home. Okay? This becomes trickier as kids age, of course, right? Because they have their own money, they're really able to kind of move around, they have transportation, all these other things. This is why it's important to actually lay the foundation for healthy nutrition before they're teenagers. Up until the age of about 10 or 12, the biggest kind of input into that child's choice is mom and dad. Okay? After that age, it's their peers and media. Okay? So you have that opportunity, and it's kind of a short-lived opportunity. Then also experiences with food, and we'll talk about this more when we look at aversions. Now, one of the things parents will often come up to me in the supermarket, or less so now that I don't have really little kids, they'll say, you know, I think my child's allergic to vegetables. Every time I give the child vegetables, you know, she won't eat them. Well, kids only think they're allergic to vegetables, okay? There are things that we can do that actually encourage children to eat some of these foods that we want them to eat. So, you know, if you think about some, like turnip, that's not an entry-level vegetable for many kids. Start with things that are more readily accepted. So mild flavored vegetables at first. Okay? And this really starts when you're feeding them first foods. There's a reason we suggest that people start with vegetables rather than fruits, to give them a taste for that and help them understand that food and then move on to another one. Okay? Children also have more taste buds. Think about all the things that we've done that have dulled the sense of taste. We've gotten older, right? We might burn our tongue a lot, you know, coffee, hot soup, all of those things. Maybe people smoke. That's really going to affect your sense of taste. Alcohol does too. Okay, so we've really changed our sense of taste as we age, and kids, very, very acute sense of taste. This is a protection mechanism for them, right? Because they explore the world with their mouth. So consider that flavors that really are kind of mild to you are really strong to them potentially. Also slightly undercooked, right? Carrots, things like this, cook them till they're al dente. So they have a little bit of crispness or firmness, not mush. Kids don't like that. Crunchy foods, brightly colored and easy to eat. You know, finger foods, that can be a great deal of fun for kids. You know, so if you're going to give a kid a snack in front of the TV, although I don't really recommend it, why not give them carrot coins or give them apple slices or something that's fun to eat? Now, one of the other things I want to talk about, especially because it's right on the heels of vegetables, is neophobia. So if you break this down a little bit, new, phobia, fear. So it's a fear of new things. And your book says that it's practically universal among children. I'm not sure that I believe that. I've certainly seen that with my own kids. But consider that I don't see a whole lot of young children who just, you know, are displaying this neophobia when it comes to a new shape of chocolate, a new candy, a new breakfast cereal. Okay? It generally is around foods that they consider healthy or that their parents are trying to get them to eat. Right? Like, why are you pushing this on me? They're suspect. These kids are really savvy. They're very smart. So suggesting foods, okay? And trying a little bit of it, not commanding. Okay, none of that, you're going to sit here till you finish it stuff. And actually, when I talk to parents about introducing foods, I tell them not even to say a word. Just put the food on the table. Don't mention it's healthy. Don't say anything. It's really hard for parents to do that, let me tell you. Just eat it, enjoy it, don't make a comment, and the kid will naturally become interested and gravitate toward it. If you want to kill any interest in that food, say, hey, Junior, this is healthy. That's going to kill it. Okay, don't do that. If you have to say something, and again, you know, I know we want to, we're kind of excited, we got some new food on the table. Say, wow, that broccoli's green. Wow, that kind of looks like little trees. Have fun. Allow children to explore it with their senses. Okay, I mean, healthy is kind of a code word for it's not going to taste very good. And if I say this, when I used to be a catering chef, I'd have adults come up to me and say, well, what does it taste like? Right? Like those are the children that were forced to eat things, and maybe their parents all said, oh, it tastes like chicken, you'll like it. Right? Don't do that. Don't play games. Just enjoy the food, enjoy your children. And again, I just want to bring up that forcing and bribing do not work. Jessica Seinfeld, Missy Chase Lapine, the sneaky chef, sneaky gourmet, don't do that either. Okay? Don't try to hide foods in other foods because it doesn't actually increase your child's nutrition knowledge. If you want to cook with those recipes, great. They're fine recipes, but do it with your child. There's nothing like blindsiding someone. And in this age of allergies, again, there should be no secret ingredients. Okay? And I've tried this, and I speak from experience here, not just as a nutrition person, but also as a mom. I can remember using beets in chocolate cake. And my husband said to me, well, what's the goal here? Are you trying to get the kid to like beets more or chocolate cake? And I was like, you're right. And my savvy little kid said to me, Mom, what did you really put in this? And she wouldn't eat anything that came out of my kitchen without asking me that for weeks, okay, because she knew I tricked her. And we actually destroyed some kind of a bond we had there and some kind of trust around food. So I encourage you not to do that. Also forbidden foods, and I've seen this happen, where we have some food that is highly desired, and you see this with alcohol as well. If it's absolutely off limits, no one ever gets to taste it, it becomes more and more important, right? And then kids really, really want to have it. So don't do that. I mean, if you come to my home, you will see there are potato chips, there are chocolate chip cookies. It's about using those things responsibly. So it's actually teaching children that there's no food that's horrible or off limits. It's that we want to use it appropriately in the appropriate amount with good timing and understand the effect that those different foods have on our body. Let's look at food jags. And this is, and I think we go on these too, at least I know I do. So your book characterizes this as consecutive days of eating only a couple of foods, okay, and ignoring everything else. And I know in strawberry season, I do this. I'll have strawberries at breakfast, I'll have some at lunch, and I'll have some, with dinner or dessert because they're so good. Now this only lasts during the season, of course. Now some kids will actually go on these food jags for quite a period of time. Now I've talked to my pediatrician about this because Sizer and Whitney say that if it lasts more than a week or so or 2 weeks, then you have to be concerned. I don't agree with that. If the child is overall healthy, why would you then try to force them to eat something? Let it run its course. If it goes on and you're concerned, talk to the doctor. But other than that, I wouldn't make a big deal out of it because you're actually saying to that child, this food is bad or you shouldn't eat it. I mean, if it's potato chips, we're going to nip that in the bud. But if it's something like bananas or tuna fish or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, so what? Let it go on. It's fine. Now, I mentioned forcing and bribing kids. And I mentioned role modeling. Now, I know there are foods I don't like. There aren't a whole lot of them, but there are foods I don't like, and there are foods my children don't like. I have permission to dislike foods, and so do they. So you have to allow room for that. Now, on our table there, I will say to the kids, you want, this green vegetable or this one. I give them choice. And I think that's really important if you want to actually encourage children. So give a choice, and if someone says they don't like something, don't push it because it's not going to encourage them to like it more. And if children say that they're full, believe them. We don't want to override that normal sense of satiety. No clean plate club, no reward for finishing your dinner. We want to get away from that. If you're concerned about what the child is eating, give them small portions of each food and don't necessarily have dessert, right? I mean, we can really control this food environment pretty well. And just because we're going to honor those preferences of the child doesn't mean that we're going to dictate whatever they're going to eat, and kind of abdicate our role as parents. So if I had a child that, and I hear this from parents, my kid will only eat macaroni and cheese. Well, that's because you only give them macaroni and cheese, or you're willing to. You're not a short order cook. And there's no reason that adults and children can't eat the same meal, right? And if the child only wants macaroni and cheese and you have made chicken instead, well, if they choose not to eat, that's up to them. Now, I sound hardcore here, like, I'm really mean, but it's something I struggled with. I was a short order cook for my kids for a couple years, and then I was like, this is crazy, right? I'm spending all my time in the kitchen, and I don't want to do that. I want to go out and play and do all these fun things. So you're in charge of providing the meal. The child determines whether or not they're going to eat it. And a hungry child suddenly likes a lot more foods than macaroni and cheese. Okay, let's look at some food habits. And again, this slide is just, I left it in here to just drive home that idea that parents need to really, really look at their own eating habits. Okay, I see this quite often, so again, it bears repeating. Let's move on to a couple of vocabulary words that I really want you to know. So allergies. I've mentioned allergies a minute ago when we were talking about whether or not children are allergic to vegetables. And luckily I haven't heard of too many vegetable allergies. But when we look at an allergy, this involves the immune system. Okay, so we're actually having antibodies against some protein in that food. And you can think about if you have an allergy maybe to bee stings or different kinds of plants and things like this, you know some of those symptoms of the allergy. Maybe you have some swelling and puffiness, your eyes water, you sneeze a whole bunch. These are pretty common also for food allergies. Sometimes there'll be swelling in the throat, breathing issues as well. So you see some inflammation, and this is about histamine production. Okay? So a food allergy, okay, involves the immune system. And so we have to be kind of careful with this. Generally, the first time a food is introduced to a child, so let's say that they have peanut butter, there's not going to be a reaction. Now, the next time they have that peanut butter, we will see a reaction, because it takes time for your body to say, oh, that peanut butter is something to fight. It's an invader. I need to make an antibody to it so that next time I see it, during the second exposure, I can respond appropriately and, you know, cause all those symptoms with you know, itchy eyes and, you know, breathing and all that kind of stuff. So it involves antibodies and then this histamine, okay? And the histamine is actually the body chemical that causes that response. Okay, so sometimes if you have hay fever or seasonal allergies, you'll get some kind of a antihistamine, okay, like Benadryl or something like this. And that's what we're talking about with allergies. Now, a food intolerance is different. And so when we look at an intolerance, this is a reaction. So the most classic one is lactose intolerance. You can also have gluten intolerance and many, many other kinds. This does not involve the immune system, but you can still have a lot of symptoms and get sick. So with lactose intolerance, you have a lot of GI issues generally. A food aversion, on the other hand, is not involving the immune system, and it can still make you sick though. So let me explain that a little bit more. So when we see a food aversion, this is like an extreme dislike for a food. And I almost am not crazy about the word dislike, okay? It's some kind of a reaction, but we don't want to use that word either, but it's that same kind of a concept. Okay, and it can occur for different reasons. It could be psychological, it could be experience. So for instance, I remember still, I was 5 years old, and I was really excited to have chocolate pudding. I had never had it before. Well, the chocolate pudding had gone off. It was a little bad. And so after I ate that, I ended up with food poisoning as a little kid. I absolutely hate anything that's pudding texture. Okay, so it had really, you know, these kind of long-lasting implications for me, this aversion. So I've associated those negative things that I experienced as a child with that particular texture and puddings in general. Okay, so you'll see this a lot, and you know, you can think about maybe you went out and got, you know, some kind of food and it made you sick, or even beverages, alcohol. Like some people will say, oh yeah, I got really, really sick on whiskey once, and even the smell of whiskey will just make me nauseated. That's a food aversion, okay? Now here's a picture of some of these common foods that are going to be high allergens. So dairy products, soy products, eggs, fish and shellfish, nuts, so tree nuts as well as ground nuts like peanuts. And you know, these are ones, and gluten is up there as well, and I mentioned soy. These are ones that we have to be very careful about introducing, and then also cross-contamination. These again are the most common allergies that we see. Now, avoiding allergens for young kids can be really tricky. So I just have a couple of comments about that, because it seems to me that, and I think that statistics bear this out, that we have more food allergies now in our population than we have in the past, especially with things like peanut butter. So you see whole schools rerouting their cafeteria in ways to avoid this. And it's really important because for some children, those allergies can be deadly. So you want to make sure that you're packing really safe lunches at home, as well as snacks. And also that there's a no sharing policy, okay? So that kids eat the lunch that they've brought. Also, reading labels can be really important. Very often there's allergy information. It'll say this food was processed in a plant that also has peanut exposure, something like this. Ask about restaurant meals. This is tricky, okay? I wouldn't necessarily ask the server. This may be the day that the chef changed the secret recipe. So when I worked in restaurants, we would actually, if someone said they had a food allergy, the chef would go out and talk to them. And it was better safe than sorry. Many places are now, especially in New York City, labeling. They'll say, you know, this kitchen uses peanuts and eggs and different kinds of things. Educate family and friends. Again, no secret ingredients. No, oh, I really think they have a peanut allergy. I'm going to sneak it in and see what happens. Forget that. Train the child to recognize the symptoms. So when one of my daughter's friends would come to the house, she would always come with her EpiPen. I was trained on how to use it. And the child knew exactly what would happen when she was exposed because she'd been through it. And I wouldn't give her anything that she didn't read the label. And we would read the label together when she was too little. But she understood the words peanut. Like, that was very, very easy for her to find. So again, the child needs to have some responsibility here, but it's mainly the adults around the child, especially when they're young. When we look at nutrient deficiencies, I'm going to give you, just kind of an overview of some of the things that we see as potential problems or consequences. Keep in mind that some of these are only going to be really seen in the developing world. So blindness. For instance, we don't see a whole lot of young children going blind because they don't have adequate vitamin A, at least not in the US. It's the #1 cause of preventable blindness in places like Nepal. So there we're very concerned about it. Now, cognitive impairment and stunted growth, you can see those in the US if you look hard enough. Depressed immune function, absolutely. Emotional health, yes, for sure. Mood disturbances, yeah, definitely, depending on what kids are eating or whether they're eating. If they don't have good breakfast, they're not going to be able to concentrate. They're going to get in trouble at school. They're going to act out, have discipline problems. We know this. Poor academic performance, absolutely. In schools where they've given children universal breakfast before the MCAS tests, these standardized tests, the scores on the exams went way up. Now imagine if we actually gave our kids breakfast every day of the school year. These kids would be learning. We'd have a completely different academic set of standards. Dental problems as well, and then increased risk of chronic disease. For sure. And the seeds of chronic disease are sown when children are young. Okay, we actually see markers of heart disease in very, very young children. Okay, so this is the time when we really can reduce that risk of chronic disease. Now, our nutrients of concern, and this is just going to kind of be a quick review of some of the things that I've already mentioned. Iron, and we know who that is, that population. Calcium. I didn't talk a whole lot about that specifically, but the other thing that we should pair that up with, of course, is vitamin D. Children aren't drinking as much milk as they have in the past, more soda and juices and water, which water is certainly a good choice, but those other things, the soda and the juice, junk food, right? We need to find another source of that calcium and vitamin D in the diet. Omega-3s and omega-6s, but especially the omega-3s. And then I've also put vitamin A and iodine, and this is in the developing world. We don't have too much trouble with this in the US in terms of catastrophic effects, but we definitely see that in the developing world. So with young children, I just want to mention again, it's about the environment that children are in, is the habits that they develop as young children, as well as the habits that they're exposed to from parents and other people who love them.